Well, hello everyone. I am Siamak Hodjat. I'm a research engineer at Vive Labs, Samsung Electronics. I am part of a team that teaches Bixby new capabilities. I've been in the virtual assistant space for almost 20 years now, and I think it's exciting times. I'm happy to be here to tell you how you can be a pioneer in adding pretty advanced user experiences to a virtual assistant using Bixby's Developer Studio. This is an advanced topic. The reason is I'm going to get into building a shopping cart experience. If you think about that, a shopping cart experience, there's a lot of actions here, a few actions at least, to initialize the shopping cart, update the shopping cart, make payments. And on top of that, we want to make this experience be something that you can customize for your product, for your service, and enabled by voice. So it is supposed to be advanced. But I'm going to make it useful for everyone. The prerequisite to this session is the session that Sarah had yesterday on teaching Bixby what you need to know, which introduced the Bixby Developer Studio and all the basics. But even if you haven't been in that session, it's okay. I'm going to review all the basics again. So what I'm going to talk about here, most of the focus of my session is going to be how you can build actions that are more than just search and calculations. I mean, you can build pretty interesting user experiences with implementing a search action, let's say finding movies that are playing in the theaters. But wouldn't it be cool if we can take it to the next level and actually buy tickets to that movie? There are many other examples of that here. And so for that, I will start with just an overview of how you can develop for Bixby, and then talk about I'll show you how you can add a simple transaction model, and then speak a little bit about how you can make it more advanced and make improvements to it, and what else is going to come soon to Bixby Developer Studio. All right, so let's start with an overview. You might have already heard about capsules. It was mentioned in the keynote and in the sessions yesterday. What we mean by capsule is everything you need to teach Bixby something new. So input to a capsule is a natural language request, and the output is a view, what Bixby says back to the user and visually displays on the screen as a response to the user's request. To be a little bit more specific on what does everything mean here, it's basically defining the models, the views, and then training Bixby to map the natural language request input to these models and invoke the right views in response to users' requests. It helps to look at this by going through an example. The example I'm going to use is a space resort. This is where we imagine we are a company that has space resorts all over the solar system, and then we allow our users to search for these space resorts by asking about different features they might have, like quantum bungee jumping. Oh, which is very fun. It's me doing quantum bungee jumping. You have to try it. Come on. Too many slides. Go! All right. So yeah, starting with the model. What we do is we model the concepts and the actions. We use a language, a Bixby language for modeling. This is a language that we created. It's goal has been to be, the goal is to have a language that is easy to read and also easy to author with a very simple schema. You see examples of those here in these models I've created. At the heart of a model is our actions. So for the find space resort use case, we can define an action, find space resort. Each action needs to have a type. So search is one of the types that we can assign to our actions. And each action needs to have an output. So find space resort actions output is space resort. These, and then actions could also have inputs, like the planet, the search criteria, and all these are also concepts that are also defined in our capsule. All right, so that was a definition of an action. We also defined the concepts. We have two different types of concepts, primitives, such as Boolean, decimal, integer, enum. In this case, I defined search criteria to be a name, and I defined planet to be an enum. We're limiting this to only planets in solar system, and there's just a finite list of them, so we can just list them all here. All right, so that's primitive concepts. We also have structured concepts. So structures are objects that have properties, and the properties are also concepts themselves. So space resort has a name, description, maybe some photos. And this is an example of defining a structure. All right, so that concludes defining the model, or a review of how to define the models. Now that we have our models, we need the views. This is basically how we are going to speak about, how is Bixby going to speak about the models that we define and how it's going to visually render them. So on the right side, I have an example of a Bixby view that is rendered on Bixby Developer Studio Simulator. On top is the message that the Bixby is saying back in response to a request. Probably something about finding space resorts on planet Jupiter. And then we have the visual layouts here. On the left side, you see how it's defined in the Bixby language. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but what you see here is that this is a result view. This is a result of output of an action. And we are basically matching this to a space resort concept. We're just going to render one item here. And all this is basically saying that this result, the space resort images are going to be rendered here. And then we have a title that we put on top of that image. So we got the image and the title on top of it. We have good documentation on this, and it's pretty easy to fill these out. We have autocomplete and all that good stuff. So model, views, and then now we want to, the other main step is to teach Bixby about our models. Bixby learns by example. So we have to provide an example of our use cases. In this case, the example I provided is finding kid-friendly space resorts near Mars. We connect the phrases and words in the example to our concepts that we define in the model. Each training example needs to have a goal. In this case, the goal is finding space resorts. It's kind of obvious. And we also see the word Mars here, that is a planet. So we mark it and link it to the planet concept that we already defined in the capsule. And we see the phrase kid-friendly. We identify that as a search criteria. We mark it and link it to that concept. Once we have the examples, Bixby would study them and would learn from those about how it can react to a natural language request, and can then generate a program that would basically correctly respond to users' input. I have an example of that here. The user is asking for pet-friendly resource on Jupyter. This is a pretty simple plan here that is generated by Bixby, but demonstrates the capability of Bixby in kind of plugging out the parts of this input, the planets, Jupyter, and search criteria, and passing it into the action, and then finally executing the action and getting the results. All right. So that was a quick overview. Now I'm going to show you how we can use this modeling and define these views and training and create a transactional capsule. So I'm going to take the Bixby capsule for space resorts, where we have the find action defined, and now I want to take it to the next level, where you not only find a space resort, but also book or make a reservation for it. I'm going to switch to the Bixby Developer Studio. This is our Developer Studio. On the left side, you see like all the files and a capsule. I've preloaded the space resort capsule here. And now I'm going to just think about what I want to do here, which is enable making reservation on a space resort. For that, I need an action. So I would create a new model. I just right-click and add this model. This is an action. My action is make reservation. As I said before, each action has an output and inputs. Inputs to the make reservation action, we want to know the destination of the user. So that's really required. We cannot reserve anything without having the destination. And that would be the space resort. We also need an input for the date interval, where Oh, typo. That saved me. Thank you. And there's another input, the interval. This is when we want to make the reservation. As a type, so it also needs a type. I'm going to just use our library capsule here. We have a library for the time concept. That helps us a lot. We don't need to worry about all the details about matching date times. I'm also going to make this a required input. We also need an output, and the output for make reservation is a reservation. I haven't defined this yet, so I'll go ahead and define this concept, the reservation concept, which is the output. Again, I need to create the new model. This time the template is let's make it a structure. Let's call it reservation. And we need to define the properties for this. I'll keep it simple. So again, we need the destination. You really don't have a reservation if you don't know where you're going. And that's space resorts. Another property could be simply the reservation interval. that's also required. Okay, so that's basically date interval. Not typing correctly. So that would be the output. Now, this action has the output defined. It has the inputs. It needs a type. When we make a reservation, we are actually committing to a space trip. So that's also a predefined type that we can assign to our action. And that basically concludes the modeling for this simple transaction. Now that we have a model, we will create a view. So now I'm going under the resources folder where we can define our views. And I'll define a view. The view here would be for the reservation. This is, again, a result of an action. So I use the result view. And I'll match it to the reservation concept. So this would say how we want to render this concept reservation. I'm assigning the variable r to this concept. And now we can say, like, we can describe what Bixby can say back when it sees the reservation. So we could say, I'll add a dialog template here. And I'm going to say, enjoy your trip on. Let's put the value of the space resort name here. And even maybe say when the user is going to stay. So the interval. So that's the message that Bixby is going to say back when we make reservation. Let's also render some stuff here. We can, let me just make this a little bit bigger. Oops. It's hard to get. Sorry, typo. All right, for rendering this, I'm going to just use the layout that we already defined before for find space resort use case. I'm going to just render the space resort visually on the display. And I'm going to use the details mode of that rendering. So that's defined before. We had it for finding space resorts. And that's basically the view. Simply give a message and render the space resort details. Now I'll go to the training tab and train it with, let's say, users might ask for reserve a resort on Jupiter, for example. That could be one way of asking for a reservation. The goal here is make reservation. And Jupiter would be the planet. So I'm just marking it as such. And that would be my training. So let's try it. So I can just click on this arrow here that would execute the action. But so one thing I didn't cover is we need to have an implementation for each action. And I skipped that part. So that is done by defining the endpoints. I already have that defined. For this demo, I'm just going to uncomment it. What this is basically is supposed to be calling our endpoint for making reservations. I use a different name here. Let me change it. So this is associating an implementation to the make reservation action. I've already wrote that JavaScript. It's going to call our service, send a signal to the planet that we're making space resort, and doing all that cool stuff. Let's try this again. So I asked to make a reservation on Jupiter. It's prompting me for the space resort. It found all the space resorts we had on moons of Jupiter, but I have to narrow it down to only one. If you remember when I declared the input for make reservation, I made it required, but I also said only one. So if we match more than one, Bixby knows it has to prompt me. I'm going to just choose Europa. Now it's prompting me for the time interval. That was also a required input, and the time library is going to take care of rendering an input view for me, asking about when I want to go there. I'll choose November 21 and 22, and boom, we get this kind of the receipt or the reservation for this simple transactional action. Let me go back to the presentation. So this was basically a simple transactional model. And that would work for, so what was missing there was like we didn't really ask users to confirm anything. We went ahead and did a kind of what we call a one-shot commit, which is fine if it's, if you have something that is not that sensitive, like setting your reminders. You can set the reminder in one shot, remind me to take out the trash. It's okay. I mean, it's just a reminder. You don't even really need to take out the trash. So you're going to be fine. But if you want to do it a little bit more advanced, we can deal with it here, where we want to actually pause, ask user to confirm first before we actually commit the transaction. In this case, we have like, let me tell you what this shopping or more advanced shopping cart experience would look like, where there's not really just going through and committing an action right away. In a shopping cart experience, usually we start with, users really start with like starting with researching it. So where do you want to go? Decide where, like Earth, Moon, going from Earth to Moon, Sun, whatever. Like when you made the choice, you make that, like you basically add that choice to your shopping cart, and you might make updates to it. So 2 tickets to the moon from December 25 to 29. Now users might also, now we don't want this to be committed. We want to stay here, ask user if that's what they want, or if they want to make changes. If they want to make changes, they just can update the shopping cart here, change it from 2 tickets to 3 tickets, etc. If they're happy, in this case, in a lot of cases, they might have to make payments. And at the end, hopefully, they won't regret what they did. And even if they did, it would be nice if we have like a phase here where they can cancel post committing their transaction. Hopefully, in our cases, most of our users are going to be really happy about the transactions they make, and they want to just basically check the status of their transaction. So that's covered, like something that we want to do post committing a transaction. Now I'm going to describe one way of modeling those shopping phases that we saw. The model that I'm going to describe here is going to be useful for cases that are similar to a shopping cart reservation, like restaurant reservations, sending flowers. But it's going to be also useful for similar use cases, such as sending email messages. If you think about it, sending email messages have a lot of similarities, and the workflow is kind of the same. You start a shopping cart that is composing an email, you make updates, change the recipient, change the subject maybe, and then finally, when you're happy, you commit or you send the email. So everything I say here would also apply to sending email messages and similar experiences. And I mean, this is one pattern. You may come up with your own patterns. The one that I'm recommending here, we've been using in different capsules, and it's working very well for us. And this basically summarizes the model. Here, the actions are black rectangles, and concepts are the blue circles. So each action has a type. These are also types that are known to our platform. The platform wants to, or the Bixby wants to keep track of the transaction, different states of transaction, and that's why we have these types. So the workflow starts when a user asks to buy something or book something or reserve something. So as an example, book a space resort near Jupiter. That would invoke this create order action to begin the transaction. The create order would initialize a shopping cart or create an order. When we are on the order, then the user might want to make changes. So change from Jupiter to Mars, and for that we have this update order action. When user is on this order, they might decide that they don't want to go with it and they might want to cancel it. That's fine. We have an action here modeled for canceling an order. But if they are happy with it, they can book it. And that's like committing the order. At this point, if there's payments need to be made, it's going to be made on this action. And we will generate a receipt. This can be a live receipt, so even after the transaction is committed, users can still ask for it and check the status of their activity. All right, so that summarizes the advanced shopping cart model. Basically, I can show you how this looks like if we had built it. Go to which color? Blue. All right, so I've already built this, and and we can look at it here with, let's say, book a space resort, and that would initialize this shopping cart experience. The same as what we had with the one-shot commit action. The same thing, this action for creating this order has required inputs, and one of them is the space resort. So again, like last time, users have to first choose their destination. And we also want to ask about the date interval where they're traveling. Similar to before, we answered that question. I did a slight improvement to the experience where there is also like rooms that they can reserve. I'm going to go with the more expensive one. And here what we have is like this time around, instead of going straight and committing the order, we stop here where Bixby is asking for confirmation. Are you sure you want to book this trip? And you can look at this as a form that has the values of the form are initialized based on what the user has said or based on defaults that we provided. And there's also like the number of astronauts here. We didn't prompt the user for that, but we initialized it to 2 because most of our customers want to buy 2 tickets. Now, in this form, this is a view that allows users to basically go and change their selections. They can do it either by tapping or by voice. And if they are happy with it, they just say yes or confirm, and now they get the receipt. Let's look at this again. Let's look at behind the scenes. So here we have like this little bug here. That's the debug console. It shows what's happening behind the scenes. And if you look carefully here, and I'll explain this a little bit more might be more obvious when you look at the actions. But if you look carefully, this is a deeper plan here, but it goes into the same, basically the same steps, phases that we described before. So first phase is to find what you want to buy. There's an item. I don't know if you can read this, but it says create order, where it initializes the shopping cart. And then you'll get an order, which it's basically your shopping cart. You can update it, and if you're happy, you go ahead and commit. But the plan that Bixby generates goes all the way to commit, but it stops on the order and asks for confirmation. All right, so that demonstrates how this would look like. We can quickly go and look at the actions and how they are defined in Bixby language. These actions basically correspond to the shopping cart model diagram I showed, the same workflow. Create order would be there for initializing the order. It's of type begin transaction, as we said. It just tracks the state of a transaction. The output is the order, so that's basically the same as like the shopping cart. The inputs is the item that the user wants to buy, and I also added like buyer information. You might need it for billing purposes. So I got it there. Now let's look a little bit more into what an order is. The order is a transaction. We'll go into the phases of a transaction, which is basically updates and commits. And it has an item and buyer information, so pretty straightforward. The item itself, in our case, it's a reservation for a habitat pod on a space resort for a certain number of astronauts for a certain date interval. In your case, this could be a book, a video game, a restaurant reservation. So the same pattern could apply for your use cases. And training is also simple. So the input I tried, book a space resort. The goal here is commit order. There's a little bit more to it. In this case, I provided some hints to Bixby so that it would know that for book a space resort, the user wants to go all the way. The intention is to basically go all the way and book this and make the reservation. But to get there, we need an order. And to create the order, we need an item. So we need a shopping cart, and we need an item in that shopping cart. So what you see here is what we call natural language flags. We can assign to any training example. And it gives hints to the program generator to generate the workflow that we want. So that was create order. This is where if user confirms, if the user is happy and wants to commit, then the commit order action is invoked. This subtype commit. We have an extra annotation here which tells Bixby that it has to ask for confirmation before going ahead and executing this action. The input is the order, and the output is the receipt. Basically, that part is pretty straightforward. Again, the update order action, that's also one of the actions we showed earlier in the diagram. And it takes an order, and the output is the updated order. And it also takes inputs that say what has to be changed in the order. So in this case, we might want to either change the buyer information or change an item in the order. And the item that has to be changed, this structure basically encapsulates information about what has to be changed. This is the item that we want to change, and this is and the other properties basically indicate what has to be changed. And again, there needs to be training for that. It's nothing too complex. And that would actually basically concludes the modeling that we are proposing here and suggesting for a shopping cart experience. There is a lot more we can do to improve this experience. I'll get a little bit into that. I just want to give some hints of what we can do, and I don't go into too much detail about it. So one thing, if we had zoomed into the plan that I showed you earlier for making a reservation, if somebody just says, book a space resort, there's a lot we need before we can actually make the reservation. And those are what we are going to prompt the user for. So we need to know when they want to go, we need to know where they want to go, and we need to know how many people are basically traveling. And the challenge with that is, it's just, whenever there's prompts, sometimes it gets annoying. Like, this is my son when he was 4 years old. Has too many questions. And I'm sure you guys had experiences like that where it's just too many questions gets annoying. So the solution for that is, one way is to basically initialize these values to common sense defaults. If most of our customers book 2 tickets, let's just do that. Or even better, we can tell Bixby to observe users' behavior and learn the best value to initialize the input to. I don't get into details of this. Simple annotation. There's more to it that was covered by Alex and Paulina's presentation yesterday. We have plenty of documentation on it too. But basically with this, if you're a solo traveler or you go on business trips a lot and you usually only want to take 1 ticket, Bixby learns that. If on holidays you take your family and you want 5 tickets, Bixby can also learn that and adapt to your needs based on all the other criteria. Another thing that we can improve, we can improve the experience by using what we call activity cards. These are reminders of activities to come. So in case of a space resort activity, we can remind the users in the Bixby homepage that there is a space trip coming soon. Something like this shows up as a reminder. And the way to define this is basically to define what state the activity is going to be in. The main thing here is, so the states that an activity can be is like scheduled, when the activity actually is going to take place. It becomes relevant, and right after it's done, it goes into the recent stack. The main thing to define here is when it's going to be relevant. In case of a space trip, maybe 36 hours before takeoff, it's when it's relevant. Before it's relevant, it would be something that is scheduled, and right after takeoff, it could be something that goes into the recent stack. Yeah, so all that can be defined in Bixby language. Won't go into details of this. It's there in the documentation. And the last thing we can do to improve the experience, which is a very important part as well, is to handle error cases. Like, what if we can only get at most 4 tickets? So if the user asks for 8 tickets, and we can only go up to booking 4 tickets, we have to handle that error case. For that, we can declare errors when we define the actions, and we can handle these errors and define the user experience for cases when these errors happen in the action definition. The errors itself are thrown by the action implementation. Let's say the JavaScript action implementation would just throw an error saying there's too many astronauts, and then we decide how to treat that error. Again, refer to documentation. It's just here as a pointer for you to know. And yeah, that's basically things that we can do to improve the experience. I just want to touch on things that are coming soon in Bixby Developer Studio. The main one that I skipped was payments. There's 2 ways to make payments, Samsung Pay and OAuth. If your API accepts credit cards, Samsung Pay is a good option to consider. This is coming soon, but if you want to be an early adopter, please contact our dev relations, and they'll help you, get to use this Samsung Pay stuff. It's pretty cool. And if you store the user credit cards on your side, then you might want to use OAuth for payments. This is basically allows Bixby to make payments on the user's behalf. There's much more to come. Hands eyes free, which I encourage you to stay here for the next session, which covers that part. And payment systems are already mentioned. On-device testing and additional devices. This is also something that, if you're interested, just stay here for the next presentation. And marketplace. So just go check our developer center, and we'll have announcements for these that are coming soon. Again, I encourage you guys to go to our next session. It's pretty cool with a very good demo. I don't want to take the surprise out, but thank you very much for your time. If you had any questions, I don't have time. Go to, yeah, thank you.